Okay, let's get into this deep dive on Cambodia. Because the history we're looking at here is, well, it's defined by an almost unbelievable contradiction.
It really is.
I mean, you're looking at a civilization that 1,000 years ago had the genius to build these massive stone cities like Angkor, a place that was physically larger than any capital in Europe at the time.
And then you fast forward to the 20th century.
And you get a catastrophe, entire cities emptied in a day, where just, wearing glasses could be a death sentence.
It's one of history's steepest and most tragic arcs. From this divine imperial power built on controlling water to a total ideological collapse.
Right. And our sources really dig into the full sweep of it. So our mission here is to get beyond just recounting the events.
Exactly. We want you to understand the underlying architecture, the mix of faith, massive engineering, and ideology that made both the glory of Angkor and the horror of Year Zero possible.
So to do that, we have to start where the whole story begins, the land itself.
What's so fascinating is that the foundation of Khmer civilization wasn't really conquest. It was hydrology. It was all about the water, the Mekong River and the Tonle Sap Lake.
That's seasonal flooding.
That's the engine. And the early Khmer people realized the key wasn't just having water. It was mastering it, controlling it.
And that kind of control, especially for growing rice, needs a lot of planning. It's not something a few small villages can just do on their own.
Not at all. The sources are so clear on this. Rice wasn't just food, it was order. It demanded canals, reservoirs, cooperation, and a central authority to manage this incredibly complex hydraulic network.
So the need for coordination for survival, really, it pushes them towards centralization.
And that political need then merges perfectly with the spiritual. You get these huge influences coming in from India, Hinduism, Buddhism.
And specifically this idea of the king god, the Dhiraja.
Yes. From around the 6th century, power and religion become totally inseparable. The king isn't just a leader anymore, he's a divine go-between.
So a figure like Jayavarman II comes along, unifies these little kingdoms, and basically says, I am the link between heaven and earth.
And his word is now the will of the gods. It ensures the rain, the harvest, the order of the universe.
So the king's divine legitimacy is literally tied to whether the canals work and the rice grows.
That is the essential insight. That fusion of divine right and water control is the birth of the Khmer nation. It's what sets the stage for Angkor.
And that fusion explains the incredible scale that came next. I mean, by the 10th to the 12th centuries, Angkor is a true metropolis.
The largest in the world at the time. And it was built by the general population, not as slavery in the traditional sense, but as a form of religious duty, a tax paid in labor for the glory of the gods and the king.
And the physical proof of that is, of course, Angkor Wat.
Angkor Wat is the stone manifestation of that power, absolutely. Suryavarman II built it for Vishnu. But, the real genius wasn't just the temples, it was the plumbing.
The plumbing being these massive reservoirs, the beret.
Precisely. They were gigantic. They were basically a form of climate control. They'd absorb the monsoon floods and then release that water during the dry season.
Which made the climate predictable.
It made it predictable, and that predictability allowed for 2, sometimes even 3, rice harvests a year.
And that's the food surplus that supports 1 million people. You put that next to London's, 50,000 at the time?
It just shows you the scale of the achievement. It was an entire civilization built on the belief that the God King was literally keeping the world in balance.
But the system's greatest strength, that dependence on predictability, was also its fatal flaw.
It was. The sources point to a long, slow decline, starting around 1350. And the trigger seems to have been environmental.
So climate change, basically. The little ice age affecting the tropics.
That's what the evidence suggests. You get unpredictable weather, massive floods that overwhelm the system, followed by long droughts that it can't handle. The canals silt up, the reservoirs fail.
And when the infrastructure fails, the people don't blame the engineers.
They ask a much deeper question. If the water fails, does that mean the king is no longer chosen by the gods? Is the whole system a lie?
So it's a crisis of faith. The psychological contract is just broken.
Absolutely. And that internal crisis creates weakness. It opens the door for attacks from outside, especially from the rising kingdom of Siam. So you get this slow erosion of territory and of belief until finally, in the mid-15th century, they abandon Angkor.
They moved the capital south to Phnom Penh, and that's really the symbolic end of the great empire.
It is. And what's left behind is this vulnerable vacuum.
So what happens to a great empire when it's reduced to a weak buffer state?
For the next 300 years, it's just about survival. Cambodia is caught, as one source puts it, between the jaws of a vice.
The vice being Siam, which is now Thailand and Vietnam.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Two aggressive expanding powers.
Yeah.
And Cambodia survives only by placating them, by being pulled back and forth. It lost nearly two-thirds of its historic land during this period,
Just a slow, grinding erosion.
which sets the stage for the French arrival in 1863. King Norodom sees them coming and basically decides they are the lesser of two evils.
Better to have a distant protector than be swallowed by your neighbors.
He got protection, but the price was sovereignty. The French took over finance, foreign policy, trade, everything that mattered. The king kept his title, but he became an actor playing a king.
And then the colonial engine starts building infrastructure, but not for the Khmer people.
No, it's for extraction. Roads and ports to get rubber from French plantations to the global market. And it was all built using a new kind of forced labor.
The corvée system.
Right. Officially, it was public work, but in reality, it was a new serfdom. A grim echo of the labor that built Angkor, but totally stripped of any divine purpose. Just pure exploitation.
But colonialism had this boomerang effect, didn't it? Through education.
He did. It was a massive unintended consequence. Young Khmer elites get sent to Paris for education.
And they start reading Voltaire and Rousseau.
They absorb the language of revolution, of freedom and equality. And they come home with the perfect intellectual toolkit to dismantle the very system that created them. And crucially, they rediscover the glory of Angkor, which fuels this new sense of Khmer nationalism.
So now all the ingredients are there. A history of centralized power, anti-colonial anger, and this takes us into the Cold War and Prince Norodom Sihanouk.
Who manages, pretty brilliantly, to negotiate full independence from France in 1953. But his defining policy neutrality becomes an impossible trap.
Because in the Cold War, if you're not with one side, you're seen as being with the other.
And as the Vietnam War escalates next door, that tightrope he's walking becomes thinner and thinner. The Viet Cong are using the Cambodian jungle for the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
And Sihanouk knows he can't stop them without inviting the entire American war machine into his country.
So he tolerates it. He quietly looks the other way, trying to keep the war out. But that tightrope finally snaps in 1970.
A coup, led by General Lon Nol while Sihanouk is out of the country. And Sihanouk makes an immediate and just fatal mistake.
A catastrophic error. He forms an alliance with the Khmer Rouge, a small communist insurgency he'd previously been fighting. He goes on the radio from Beijing and uses his immense popularity to tell the peasants to join the communists and fight the new government.
And that legitimizes them overnight. It gives them the popular support they never had.
Then comes the U.S. response. To disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they begin a secret, massive carpet bombing campaign from 1969 to 1973.
And the scale of this it's hard to comprehend.
The sources confirm it. The U.S. dropped more bombs on neutral Cambodia than on all of Europe during all of World War II.
And that kind of indiscriminate violence it radicalizes the countryside, it destroys villages, kills civilians, and drives survivors straight into the arms of the Khmer Rouge.
Absolutely. The Khmer Rouge, led by Salat Sar, who we know as Pol Pot, were already radical. They were intellectuals who'd studied Maoism in Paris. But their ideology was even more extreme.
It was anti-city, anti-intellectual.
Utterly obsessed with this idea of returning to a pure agrarian past. It was this sort of magical thinking, recreating the glory of Angkor through peasant labor alone by wiping the slate clean.
And they did it instantly. April 17th, 1975, the Khmer Rouge march into Phnom Penh and they declare Year Zero.
The first act of Year Zero was the evacuation. 2 million people, everyone in the city, the sick, the elderly, women who had just given birth, forced out into the countryside at gunpoint.
Under the lie that the Americans were about to bomb the city.
A total lie. The bombing had stopped. It was a deliberate, systematic act to destroy urban civilization itself, a tabula rasa.
And everyone from the cities, the doctors, teachers, anyone with an education was immediately labeled new people.
They were the enemy.
Yeah.
The suspicious class. They were sent to the worst work camps, given the least food. Starvation was a tool of policy. Food was currency. Work was dawn to dusk, digging canals, just like in ancient times, but enforced by pure terror.
And that terror was so bureaucratic and chilling. You see it at S21, the school that became the Tool Sling Torture Center.
The logic there was just. It was insane. Prisoners were tortured until they confessed to being CIA or KGB agents. Confessions the Khmer Rouge knew were false, but they needed them on paper to justify the executions.
A process designed to dehumanize everyone involved.
Utterly. Of 20,000 prisoners at S21, only 7 are known to have survived. And then they were taken to places like Chuang Ek, the killing fields. And they were murdered with axes and bamboo sticks just to save ammunition.
The final number is just a horror, about 2 million people. 1/4 of the entire population gone in less than 4 years from execution, starvation, and overwork.
It's a societal amputation.
Hmm.
You just have to pause and absorb the totality of that.
And the end, when it came, wasn't from an uprising, it was from outside.
Right. Pol Pot, in his paranoia, started launching attacks against his powerful neighbor, Vietnam.
A huge miscalculation.
A fatal one. The Vietnamese army invaded in late 1978 and took Phnom Penh in a matter of weeks. And in a final bitter irony, the regime that most hated Vietnam was overthrown by it. Vietnam became Cambodia's reluctant savior.
What follows is just a masterclass in geopolitical cynicism. The international community, the UN, the US, China, they refuse to recognize the new government installed by Vietnam.
Because it was backed by the Soviet Union. Cold War politics trumped everything. And you need to understand how obscene this was. They continued to recognize the Khmer Rouge as the legitimate government of Cambodia.
So the Khmer Rouge kept Cambodia's seat at the United Nations.
For years. While the world was sending aid to the survivors of the genocide, the major world powers were giving political legitimacy to the murderers.
And that allowed the Khmer Rouge to retreat to the jungle and fight a civil war that lasted all the way into the late 1990s.
Leaving behind millions of landmines, a shattered country, and a generation of intellectuals and professionals completely wiped out.
Today, you see those contradictions everywhere in Cambodia. Rapid development next to deep corruption and the long authoritarian rule of Hun Sen. The Khmer Rouge Tribunal, which didn't even start until 2006, gave out just a handful of life sentences. It was symbolic at best.
And Angkor Wat is still there, isn't it? It stands as this ultimate symbol, a testament to that past glory, but also a monument to survival through centuries of violence and one of the most destructive ideologies in human history.
Yeah, the whole history is this tragic cycle, building greatness, then seeing it collapse because of the very things that made it great.
The fragility of it all is what's so stunning.
The source material ends on this really poignant note. It talks about how many young people in Cambodia today don't know the full story of what happened. Their parents and grandparents are just silent. The trauma is too great to speak about.
Which leaves us with a really crucial question, and it's one for you, the listener, to think about. When a society, for its own survival, chooses to suppress the memory of its worst trauma, is the future ever truly safe from the lessons it refused to learn?